Hi guys, this is Nadia from Valley Crafts, and today I want to show you how to make this Valentine's heart pendant. I quite often make PDF tutorials and kits for the videos I put up on YouTube, so I'll pop a link in the description below so you can take a gander over there and see if there's anything you fancy. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button because I upload new stuff all the time. Right, let's get started. So to begin with, we're going to shape our wire at the top of the heart. So you're going to need to leave roughly about 20 centimeters to the right of the heart. And we're going to be shaping the top section of the heart. Now obviously the wire that we're going to be using here needs to be quite thick because there isn't much structure to keep the stones in place. So for this design I've used 1.316 gauge wire, which is strong enough to hold gemstones in place. So you can see me shaping the top of the heart here, and this is just the beginning stages. And what I'm going to do next is take my bail making pliers, and I'm going to create a little loop. So this is for the chain attachment later on. So obviously the more central that loop is, the more central the heart will hang basically. So I'm going roughly with about the middle of the top of the heart, if that makes any sense. And this is where the loop is going to be. I'll show you later how to shift it if you didn't get it quite right. So that's what it looks like. So the next step is to create the first swirl of for the stone, for the first stone rather. And what we're going to do here is just take the wire, and we are going to be twisting it in a clockwise motion, and you need to place it roughly where the top of the heart curve ends, and the rounder the section is, the better. So in other words, the rounder you can get, the better the stone will sit. So you can see me here, I'm using my pair of pliers to adjust the circle if it isn't exactly the way I wanted it to be. So that's what it looks like so far. So next I'm going to take my stone, and the stone needs to sit in the loop just so enough so that it doesn't actually fall through, but also not, the loop doesn't need to be so small so that the stone will actually be lifted, because the smaller the loop, the higher the stone will sit and the more it will sort of protrude, and you don't want that. So the better sized fit the loop, the better. Does that even make sense? Sometimes I can't find the right words, but I hope you get what I mean. So once the stone is placed in the loop, we're going to take the wire and kind of fold it over the stone. So you kind of lift it up a little bit as you twist, so that it goes over the sort of girdle of the stone. So the top is the table and the outside of the stone is the girdle. And we want to use that wire to wedge it in place, basically like a sort of corkscrew design. And it just takes a little bit of practice. Just use a couple of pieces of wire to practice before you actually start on the heart, if you haven't done this before, to get a feel for it. The more practice you get, the easier it gets as well. So you want to make sure that you have one full revolution over the stone. And if it's not exactly right, you can use a pair of pliers to very, very gently squeeze the wire in place over the stone to make sure it actually sits nice and tight. And that's what it looks like so far. So next we're going to create an anti-clockwise swirl. It's basically like the vine setting that I taught quite a while ago now. I think it's about a year ago that I made this tutorial. So we're going to go in an anti-clockwise direction, and we're going to do exactly the same. So the loop should be roughly about 1 or 2 millimeters below the first, and it needs to be slightly smaller because we're going to use a smaller gemstone. The first gemstone is a 5 millimeter chrome diopside in this case. You can also use 6 or 4 mil, depending how big you make your pendant. So again, the loop needs to be just big enough so that the stone very comfortably sits without falling through. And once again, you can see me here, I go really slowly, and this gives you a lot more control over the wire and the stone. I know for myself that if I am new to a technique and I'm a little bit unsure, I tend to rush things, and I panic basically, and I do things too fast, and that's when you make mistakes. So it always helps, especially with this setting, to go really slowly and do the bends really slowly, because you have a lot more control, and also time to, to think about what you're doing. So that's why it looks like with 2 stones. So lastly, we are going to do the smallest of the stone. Obviously, the smaller the stone, the harder it gets to do the loop, especially with thicker wire like this, because obviously it's a lot stiffer than it would be with your, let's say, your 1 mil or your 0.8, which is your 20 gauge or 18 gauge. And it really helps to have a good length of wire. And if you're using copper, you can use a much longer length than as if you were working with silver, because the wastage isn't quite as dramatic, so you can do that. So the smallest stone, which in this case is a 3mm, so I've used 5, 4 and 3 mils for this. And I'm going to just adjust the loop. You want to make sure that it doesn't protrude too much, so you manipulate. It's always easier to do it before the stone is caged. So I'm placing the stone, and watch me here, I'm going really slow. And this is not just to show you, but it's also to control the wire over the stone. And this is how I would do all of my settings, because I have a lot more control over where the wire goes. It really helps to give you a feel for how the wire behaves when you're doing this kind of setting. So kind of rotate it and bring it back down until the wire is kind of parallel with the top. And you can always very gently squeeze, but not too hard, because you will break your gemstones. Ask me how I know. So we're going to then put a tiny little bend in the wire just below the last setting, kind of a 90-degree, to bring the wire back in line with the top of the heart, and we're going to shape it. So next, shape the heart itself. Just take your time. Obviously you can do any size you like. This heart is about 3.5 to 4 centimeters, depending on how you adjust the bottom. So the next step is to shape the heart at the bottom. So I'm putting a bend at the bottom, and I should have put that wire on the inside because we're going to curl it. So bend it up, and we've got a little length left there. So I've told you to use a little bit more wire than I have, in case you want to change the setting a little bit. I left it a little bit short, and that's why I only did 1 loop with that inside wire. So if you have a little bit more wire, you can do some other design options with that. So the next step is to create a second kind of miniature heart on the inside. So I'm just using my pliers. You can use round nose pliers if you find that easier. And all I'm doing here is basically shaping the second heart. And again, you watch me go really slowly, because it gives you more control. So shaping the heart, and try and keep it as symmetrical as possible. So my fine tipped chain nose pliers are fabulous for the job, because you have good control over the wire, and it's not too chunky. So I quite like these. I got these off eBay some time ago, and I actually need to buy another pair, because I use them all the time. They're great. Right, so I'm just shaping the heart. Obviously take much better care to get it nice and straight. It's a bit wonky at this stage, because I'm trying to show you how to do it, so it doesn't look quite as straight, but you can adjust it at your pace. Right, so now I've made it a little bit more symmetrical, and all I'm going to do here is take the leftover wire on the inside of the heart, and I'm just going to put a little swirl into it. This is to put it out of the way, basically, because obviously you've got a loose end sitting there, so you want to get rid of it in possibly the most decorative way possible. And you can see me here again, I'm squeezing the end quite hard, which again brings it to a taper. As I'm squeezing, I'm also rotating, which gives you a nice sort of rounded curl, and it brings the tip to a nice point. And then you kind of adjust. As I said, you know, the thicker wire is a bit harder to control, but yeah, that's what it looks like. So next I'm going to hammer my wire. Now this is personal preference how much you'd like to hammer. You can also use a texturing hammer. So if you're going at this stage, you're going to leave the heart as is without adding any more detail. You can, you know, go to town and hammer as you want. I'm hammering here from the back to kind of hide any dings that the hammer may put in the wire. But if you like to have sort of texture, you can do it from the front as well. So I'm just flattening it out so that I have a little bit of width to the wire, and it looks quite nice once you've wrapped it. So we're going to do this to the outside as well. So once I've done that, you can see it's a little bit spread out. And the next step is to bind the loose ends together. So for that, I'm just using my weaving wire, and I'm going to start with leaving a small tail, or maybe about 5 centimeters. I don't really know what that is in inches, but it's not very long, so just a short section, so I've got something to hold on to. So all I'm doing here is I'm going once around the outside wire, like so. Then I'm going over both wires, feed it through to the back, like so, and make sure it's nice and tight. And I'm going to once around the inside wire, feed it through to the back, like so, and then once again around the outside wire once, before bringing it over both wires, and then around the outside wire, and then we're going to continue. So it's basically once around each wire and then around both. So I've done that, and the next step is to actually, so I'm out of shot here a little bit, is put a 90-degree bend, or not really a 90-degree, a bend at the bottom to follow the initial shape of the heart. So all I'm doing here is shaping it, and I've followed, the outside wire has followed the heart on the inside, because what we're going to do next is sort of swirl it out of the way, and then we're going to bind this loose wire to the heart itself. So once again, you can see me here squeezing the wire tip before curling in, and as I said earlier, this kind of gives you a sort of finer tip than if you were to just cut the wire, and then kind of shape it until you're satisfied with how it looks. And if you're not quite happy with the shape that you've created, you can use some pliers to help you shape the swirl. And that's what it looks like so far. So we're going to fill out the other side with the wire as we did on the one side. We're going to come across the other side. So I've filled out the other side, and I've stopped where the inside heart has a little swirl, because we're going to attach that swirl to the heart itself. So I'm just going to go around the inner heart and the outer heart twice, like so, before then continuing with the weave that we've just done, which is once around the outside, once around the inside wire, and then once around both. So bring it through, and then this time it goes around both wires Then we repeat the process going around each wire once, like so. Sorry, I keep going out of shot here. Sometimes it gets quite difficult to see what I'm doing. All right, so that's what it looks like. So next, so earlier I was talking about if you weren't happy with where the loop sits, I checked with the heart and I actually didn't quite like how it was hanging. So what you can do is grab a pair of round nose pliers and you kind of roll the loop into the direction you want it to travel very gently. And the loop will shift and the wire will slightly distort, but you can fix it with a pair of pliers. So you roll the loop into the direction that you want. And then you just take a pair of pliers afterwards to kind of reshape the wire, because obviously there will be a slight dent where the wire was before. So you reshape it that way, and yeah, nobody will be none the wiser, and you've shifted your loop a little bit. So that's what it looks like. So the next step is to create like a fan shape. So the wire needs to be quite long, obviously, because you're using a lot of wire. It's quite a lot of work. It takes a long time, roughly about an hour and a half to do this. So you don't really have to do it. You can keep it simple. So all I'm doing is here, I'm starting by attaching the wire halfway. So I've got half on the left, half on the right. Just a couple of loops around the inner heart, and then I'm wrapping the wire on the right around the outside heart about 3 times. Is it 3 or 5? I think, no, it's 5 times. So 5 times around the outer heart. Can't really see anymore. So as you can see, to have that length of wire can be a little bit fiddly, and it keeps getting stuck, especially as you're trying to pull it through and it gets hooked on the settings. Unfortunately, that happens when you have got such a long length to work with, but it's better than having to add in wire, so I prefer to do that rather than, you know, use a shorter piece and then have to add in, because it, you know, there's potentially more wire endings to hook on. All right, so it's 5 times around the outside heart. Once we've done that, we come back in and we wrap around the inner heart once and then twice. So pull it through and then wrap it round. And instead of going up, we're going to go through the heart one more time and feed it through. Now, if you do it this way, the wire has got something to grip on, whereas if you just hook it around once, there's no loop that holds the wire in place, and it's not really, there's not much structure, so you need to create one full loop around the inside heart, and then you can come back to the top. And sorry if I make you seasick with all the shakiness, but the wire is a bit of a pain. So we're going to repeat this on the left and on the right all the way until all the wire is gone, and that's what it looks like. So you just keep working, and you can see here on the left and the right the wire has reached the bottom on each side. And what we're going to do now is we need to tuck it away towards the inside, because obviously that wire ending, if you cut it, it will just dig into your skin or jersey or whatever you're wearing at the time. So you want to make it as snagless as possible. So I've pulled it through to the front and made sure that it's nice and tight before trimming it off. So that's what it looks like. So the next step is to create like a recessed look. So all I'm doing here is I'm taking a pair of pliers, I'm kind of squeezing the inner heart, and I'm bending the wires inside so that it creates like a recessed look. That's what it looks like from the back and the front, and it will look much better once you have put loss on it, which I've done here. So the last step, again, obviously you don't have to add the beads. I always like to add beads to my design. So what I'm doing here is I'm feeding the wire that I've added the beads on, which is one of the weaving wires that I haven't trimmed off. If you have trimmed it off, no worries, you can just add in some more. So all I'm doing here is I'm basically stitching it to the fan that I've created. So one goes around the heart itself, and it kind of slots in with the weaving wires already, and the rest of the wire will be attached to the fan, if you will. And this is enough to keep the beads in place. You obviously don't want them slipping and sliding when you're wearing the piece. You want to make sure it's nice and tight. And that's it, that's the pendant done. So the last step obviously is to polish it if you have put it into loss. I use a radial brush for my Dremel. You can get these on eBay if you want, and that's it. That is the whole pendant done. So I really hope you enjoyed watching this. Thank you so much for joining in. And as always, I would love it if you would visit me on my social media. I've got Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And for those of you that would like to join our wire wrap and metalsmith artist group, I will pop a link in the description below. You're most welcome to come and join us. We're a fun bunch. And obviously, lastly but not least, I have a bunch of tutorials, square half round wire, and all sorts of listings in my Etsy shop or my website. So once again, I will pop a link of that below. And that's it for me. So thank you so much for joining me, and see you soon.